Perfect. Bueno, muy buenos días. Un placer conocerles.
Hello, it's wonderful getting to know you.
I have loved Javeriana and the times that I've been to Colombia. So most recently in 2019 for a psychology and peace psychology conference. And just adding to Rosarta, it was really a pleasure to receive this invitation. Oh, I'm going to mute. I have Spanish coming from mine. How do I do that? Ah, listo. Ok. Bueno, gracias. Okay. I'm muted on my computer, so if you need me, maybe take the video off and signal me that way. But I was just saying, so Andres and all of the coordinators, Boaz, who I think made the introduction, thank you so much for organizing this event. This is a kind of a nice precursor as well to a special issue coming out in memory of Emil, where Andres and Boaz have a paper about their work in Colombia. So it's a very nice kind of timed symposium. So with that, I'll go ahead and start my brief presentation. And I welcome kind of feedback and questions there at the end. So hopefully you all can see that.
Yeah, we can see that.
So today I'm just going to share a little bit about the developmental peace building model, which is kind of a integration of the research I've been doing over the last couple of decades and has some resonance with the themes already discussed today by Yoni and empathy, as well as what Rosarta and Johanna will discuss in their talks. I'm lucky in that I'm coming actually from a place of peace science. So many folks here are kind of neuroscience and psychology and thinking about conflict. But part of my training is coming from the other side. So from peace or peace studies, peace science, and thinking about what and how to apply this to individuals and groups. And here we really think a lot about the need to kind of test and develop theory in the field. So Rosarta's work is a great example of that. So what and how does this look in the real world? And we also know that 60% of armed conflicts reoccur, so there's an urgency to understand how can we not only kind of deal with existing conflicts, but then prevent their reoccurrence. And I think Colombia offers this great case and example of kind of a peace accord, but real tensions and understanding how to prevent in the future. And I think Emil's work as well had that generational and long-term consideration. So what I study, though, is what happens before someone turns 18, right, and can vote or has agency kind of by the eyes of the state. So I look particularly at childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. And then working cross-culturally, try to understand what are the universal, so kind of maybe more common or shared processes, and what might be unique or context specific. And maybe what is across different groups very similar, or as Augustine was mentioning, maybe really related more to individual differences. And so I come at this from this area of youth and political science, or youth and political violence. And we know that, especially in these post-accord periods, there's a lot of dynamic threats. High levels of violence may be decreasing, but that is still happening. And we know that there are changes in what we think about the macro system, so the overall context over time, right? The peace accord provides a new foundation for those macro system or government level interactions, but certainly there are other things at play. And that includes individual level experience with youth, with political violence. And for young people, that can have implications, as kind of mentioned over the course of the last 2 days, in terms of internalizing symptoms or depression that we think of in psychology, externalizing behavior. So whether youth themselves are participating in these cyclical acts of violence, as well as for intergroup attitudes, which I think Yoni was mentioning at the end. But like many here, I'm less interested in those factors that perpetuate conflict and more how do youth build peace amid these kind of relative periods of peace, but also these changing and transitioning kind of macro level situations. And so that's where kind of this interdisciplinary work that I think Emil embodied definitely kind of charts my own course. And so again, I get my left and right mixed up on Zoom, but in panel A, you have the social ecology of human development. So for any of the psychologists in the room, this is kind of a bread and butter image that we use in a way we think about this individual, in my case, a child or young person, nested within their family, their community, or their government, this broader culture or macro system. Be might less familiar to the psychologists, but is very familiar to those in maybe the peace scientists, panel B. And this is the paradigm of conflict transformation. So here, who is a man who's worked in Colombia and has a long history, John Paul Lederach, really was arguing and kind of outlining how personal changes can influence relational changes. Those changes can have implications for structural change, so legal systems, so maybe the formal peace accord, but then also cultural level change, so kind of the actual broader societal norms in addition to kind of what's on paper. And so kind of combining these two, in my own research, I take the psychological, how do these different levels affect the developing individual? So kind of down arrows. And then from peace science, how do these individuals, how can we make changes at the other levels of the social ecology? So really trying to understand the agentic ways that young people, so that youth peace building pink part in the middle, how they can kind of actually enact change in their societies. And very relevant to the narrative component that Rosarto was talking about along the bottom, kind of integrating this idea of kind of remembered history or lived history, a cultural history, as well as kind of the individual's own experiences. And so this brings us to the developmental peace building model. So peace building is kind of this vertical integration, consistent pro-social action, and particularly in conflict settings, targeting the historic conflict rival. When we think about peace building in children and adolescents, we've argued that out-group pro-social behavior, so in particular in situations of historic divide and conflict, acting pro-socially, so helping, sharing, or caring a member of the conflict rival is an antecedent of peace building. Those behaviors may have long-term implications for that society as well as the child. And then again, we're trying to connect across these different levels of the social ecology, which has certain methodological challenges and working at scale, as Rosarto was mentioning. So some of the antecedents of peace building are pro-social behaviors. And again, for the more peace science folks, this is the voluntary acts that benefit another, right? So it's not because your school is making you volunteer, but you choose to do it on your own. The research that looks at pro-social behavior in conflict settings is relatively mixed and somewhat divided. So some find that if youth are exposed to more political violence, they have more pro-social behavior, so a positive association. And another group of studies finds the opposite. So the more political violence that young people are exposed to, the less pro-social, so a negative link. And kind of in the series of papers, as well as with dozens of collaborators at this point, we've really tried to tease out why we might find these different patterns. And today I'm going to focus on kind of two of those dimensions. So the target, who are we acting pro-socially toward? Who are we helping? What is the benefit we're trying to yield? And that's kind of the type of pro-social behavior. So collective action might look and feel different than offering care. And I'll explain more of that through a series of studies. So again, for these antecedents, here I'll just kind of briefly show where we're thinking about on the social ecology and some references if anyone wants, they can contact me later. So I think a lot about case selection, and I run something called the Helping Kids Lab, and again, more than happy to connect with others to think about that work cross-culturally. But the case selection really helps us think about some of this macro system variability that we can't capture within a single context. This is not a table that anyone needs to pay attention to, but really we were working in 5 different settings, or what we call sites here, and they varied based on the recency of conflict and the severity. And what we found here, so in Northern Ireland, Croatia, Republic of North Macedonia, Kosovo, and Israel, this is how many stickers a young child gave to an outgroup member, so the historic conflict rival in each of these cases. And in 3 of the settings that had relatively longer, the violence had ended for a longer period of time, so about a generation after the conflict. So these children were raised in a period of at least 1 generation of peace. There was a slight in-group preference, so the gray bar, compared to the out-group or the conflict rival in the black bar. So when given 7 stickers and the choice to distribute them, children showed an in-group preference, which is quite common at this age. So the kids are around 6 to 11 years old. But what we see is in Kosovo, which had more recent and more violent conflict, that distance between the gray bar and the black bar is exaggerated. So they are more likely to give to the in-group than to the out-group. And that's higher still in Israel, where we had even more recent examples of violence. So this is kind of a simple way to think about how the macro system can affect what is a normative process, in-group preference, but in context of more recent and more violence. And we see the kind of that preference is accentuated. And this is a finding that many others have looked at, not specifically with conflict rivals and cross-culturally, but I think it's just a nice visual to situate the broader work of the Helping Kids Lab. So here are some of the contexts that we're working in. You'll see Northern Ireland there on the tip of Ireland, where I live now, as well. The next study here will be about Kosovo and Macedonia. And again, there were probably about just over 400 kids in this study. And here we wanted to know, how do kids learn about groups that aren't visibly different by ethnicity or race? So for example, in Northern Ireland, for those who are familiar, on the red, white, and blue would be kind of the UK, the Union Jack, those colors associated with the Protestant community, and then the Irish tricolor, so the green, white, and orange would be kind of associated with being Catholic or having an Irish identity. We would show kids a series of pictures that, again, over 18 sort at 100%. So every adult in this context knows what they are. They know exactly what it means. And we wanted to know, at what age do kids, for example, know that which football team you support, whether it's Ireland or Northern Ireland, may reveal something probabilistically about your background. We also showed them kind of naturalistic settings. So these are actual murals that have many of the signs and symbols of the different communities. For example, the flag or the lily, which is the flower in the one on the left. And here what we see is from age, again, roughly 5 to roughly 11, children are better able to sort this with age. So as they get older, they know what these categories are in a fairly straightforward fashion. And they also prefer their in-group images over that same period. So again, we see that in Northern Ireland. Here's the Republic of North Macedonia, just visualized a slightly different way. And this is really kind of tapping into the theory of social identity development. So we know over kind of this period of childhood, kids know who they are, they know who the others are, and then they also know which symbols are associated with the two conflict groups, and they prefer their own. And like I said, we have the sticker distribution tax. So this is just a way to visualize it, is we say, okay, here we have Aoife in green, which is a very traditional Irish name. On the left, we have Elizabeth, a very traditional Protestant name, so the two conflict groups. And orange would be the color associated with Protestantism in the north. And they have the chance to share these 7 stickers across the two children. And what we found is that with age, so as children go from 5 to 11, they have this in-group preference in all 3 contexts, so Northern Ireland, Kosovo, and Macedonia. And those children who had the stronger preference for their in-group symbols were less likely to share stickers with the out-group member. And what we're trying to then think about is, okay, this is a fairly simple task. It's with young children, relatively young children. So is there ways to think about connecting these pro-social behaviors, these sharing behaviors across different levels of the social ecology? Thinking maybe this looks a little bit different in adolescence or when people have more agentic roles and places in society. So here, this builds on some of the empathy work that Emil and others have done. So empathy, or essentially the capacity to understand and recognize the emotions of others. In social psychology, this empathy attitudes action model says if you have greater empathy, you will have more positive out-group attitudes, and that in turn should relate to more pro-social action. So that's the basic model. And we've looked at this as many others have, but in particular, we focused on children where we've induced empathy or studied it at the dispositional level, as well as for the kind of in general or toward the outgroup in the conflict rival setting. And we've also varied the target. So who you act pro-socially toward could be a refugee or a conflict rival, and also the type of behavior. And that's really what I'll focus on here. So in this particular two-wave study, there was just over 400 adolescents, and they were between 14 and 16, and just 2 time points. So we had dispositional empathy at time 1, their attitudes toward minorities at time 2, and then kind of different types of pro-social behavior. So here there was a realistic helping. So this is some work adapted by colleagues like Lori Sfazali. So are you really, would you help by sharing a book, a pencil, etc.? And then also, would you sit next to someone? So something with a bit of a social cost, would you sit next to someone at lunch and they could sign up for different sessions to sit with an outgroup member? We also asked them about collective action intention. So this was happening right in the wake of 2015. So that was kind of one of the waves of the quote unquote refugee crisis. So there was a lot of awareness about refugees and migrants in Europe at the time. And the Northern Irish government, as part of the United Kingdom, had agreed to integrate over 2,000 families. And so just, were you willing to kind of take part in the pro-refugee environment in that context? And then we also had a real petition that was going on by the United Nations, so Stand With Refugees, and whether or not children or adolescents in this case would sign that petition. We found kind of this overall empathy, attitudes, action held. So greater empathy, more positive attitudes, more willing to help an individual. So that's microsystem level, more willing to take part in collective action, so more structural. And then at the kind of a more macro level, still willing to sign a petition for kind of an overall UN intervention and approach for refugees. And then, as I mentioned, I kind of like to study the other side of the coin. So does all this action matter? Does it matter if kids are being more pro-social? What are the implications of these types of acts? And this is where I wanted to pull in some of my more recent work in Colombia. So this was with Claudia Pineda Marin, who was a graduate of Javeriana, is now at another university in Bogota. We were also working with the Center for National Historical Memory, a man who was working there named Edwin Gios, and as well as a ton of amazing partners that were working in Ciudad Bolivar. So this would be just for those you go there, but I'm saying more for our international audience, like a relatively marginalized neighborhood on the outskirts of the capital. And we did workshops using photo voice, murals, and then workshops about memory, historical memory, and some of the narratives that Roberto was talking about earlier. And the idea here is really like youth are speaking, so we're not giving voice, but amplificando, or like raising the volume of those voices. That was important to us to kind of change, again, some of the narratives around agency. And as I mentioned, we used photo voice. This is a technique that young people can take pictures and use those pictures to kind of represent their social world, as well as then comment on each other. So it forms kind of nice cross bonds. And then the young people said, actually, the photos are nice, but actually what we wanted to do is paint a mural after, even though we had co-produced the original project, they changed their minds, no bother. So we moved things around it. And then this was working with a local muralist, kind of a 2.5 block mural that was with the kind of phrase or whatever for a different today and tomorrow. And so the idea here is it's very future focused, and this is again done in 2019. And this is one of the young participants saying like their photos then became the images in the mural. And while this is important, it kind of shows the agency of the young people, or responsiveness to their kind of needs and ideas. What we think is kind of really interesting about this project is not just making and helping and support change within a community, but also kind of, so that's the theory of change, but really what happens, why would art maybe be more effective than just an intervention? So thinking about kind of the storytelling nature, why radio, and some of the things Rosarto was talking about. And so we brought that photo voice exhibit, so the words and the pictures of the young people, and showed it around in a kind of a mobile photo voice exhibit. And that showed that they had a positive impact on the indirect beneficiary. So these are not people that had anything to do with the project. They just came to the exhibit and we asked them some pre and post questions, as well as some qualitative and open-ended questions. And I won't go through all of this now, but here just kind of in a quick summary. So this is the pre-post in blue, post-test in orange, and each of the kind of different dimensions we asked about. So can youth be impactful on the peace accord? Are arts important for peace building? Can youth lead peace? There was an increase within the people on average after seeing the exhibit. So the art actually was increasing the lay general audience ideas and supports where the youth can impact their communities and can youth make an impact even at the national level. So for those who are familiar with this TV show, it's from the United States, but it's also a meme that gets a good bit of play on Twitter, so I thought I would at least tempt it. But I think when we study these things across multiple contexts and across multiple layers, it can feel a bit disorganized. So I kind of bring it back to it as hopefully a simpler and more digestible model of how different levels of the social ecology affect the developing young person, but also trying to say this young people can have and make a difference on the people around them, relational change, on the structures that kind of govern their lives, and at the broader cultural level as well. So we kind of, not any given study can study all of the different levels and all of the different eras, but I hope in my body of work, which I think is relevant to this conference, is to try to summarize some of those different pieces. So what next? Well, what does peace building look like? We'll be doing a new project actually with Columbia as one of the cases, so happy to talk to people about that. And it really emphasizes a focus on youth. And as kind of the focus on gender did in the 2000s, I think the global peace science, peace infrastructure is changing. So the UN now has 3 resolutions on youth, peace, and security. So globally, there's policy recognition that young people are changing the social world in constructive ways. And I think we as researchers just are, trying to complement and inform that. So thank you, as Rosarta said, 2 primary collaborators, although there were many, but kind of really consistent ones are Shelley and Jocelyn here, and of course, lots of different funders to make these different pieces happen. So thanks so much, and I look forward to the rest of the conference.